They laughed when humanity first arrived among the stars. The galactic races, old, proud, and ancient in their ways, looked upon the small, soft-bodied primates from a hostile world and saw only absurdity. The Deathworlders, they called them, not as a title of awe, but of mockery. They joked that Earth must be a punishment colony for failed species, a savage planet that spat out creatures too stubborn to die. They called humans reckless, emotional, and primitive. But humans, as they often did, smiled, shrugged, and offered a hand in friendship anyway. The Varine Confederacy had existed for 10,000 cycles before a single human ship stumbled into their borders. To the Varine, logic was law and emotion was weakness. Their crystalline minds processed diplomacy through mathematical purity. Their decisions made in harmony with cold efficiency. When the Terran envoy arrived, a small, outdated craft carrying a handful of exhausted explorers, the Varine counselors were ready to dismiss them outright. But one human changed everything. Commander Elias Ward. He was nothing remarkable by human standards. Graying hair, a quiet demeanor, a voice that carried calm rather than authority. Yet in the days to come, he would become the most discussed being in the known galaxy. Ward's ship, the Endeavor, had entered orbit around Varine Prime on a mercy route. The humans had intercepted a distress signal from a mining colony in the nearby Gliss Belt, a Varine outpost suffering from a containment breach that threatened to irradiate the entire system. The Confederacy had deemed it unsalvageable. The cost of rescue exceeds the yield of the mines, their overseers had declared. Loss is acceptable. But humans didn't calculate life that way. They went anyway. The rescue mission was chaos. The atmosphere storms shredded signal transmissions, radiation tore at their hull, and the automated defenses mistook them for intruders. The Endeavor took damage immediately. Ward led a landing team of 6, donning makeshift radiation suits patched with lead foil and determination. The Varine miners, crystalline beings shaped like living glass, had already sealed themselves within containment vaults, expecting death. When the first human broke through the hatch and extended a gloved hand, the miners didn't understand. "Why?" one of them transmitted through static. "You gain nothing from this." Ward only smiled behind his cracked visor. "Maybe not, but you're still alive. That's enough." For 3 days they worked without rest. The human team moved through fire and storm, cutting through collapsed tunnels, and dragging the fragile Varine to safety one by one. Their bodies weakened, their suits decayed, and still they didn't stop. On the final day, the containment field began to collapse. Ward ordered his team to evacuate while he stayed behind to stabilize the reactor manually. "You'll die," one of his crew protested. "Then I'll die knowing we tried," he answered simply. The blast was visible from orbit, a flash of light that split the sky in two. The Varine expected to find nothing but ash. Instead, they found Ward still alive, half buried in molten stone, clutching the emergency override module that had stopped the meltdown by seconds. The Confederacy broadcast the footage across their network. At first it was met with disbelief. "They endangered themselves for strangers," one counselor said. "Illogical," another muttered. "They act without gain, without reason." And yet, somewhere deep in the crystalline hive of thought, a fracture began to form. The concept of kindness without calculation, of sacrifice without reward, was alien to them. But it lingered. When Ward woke in a Varine hospital, he was surrounded by doctors who studied him more like a phenomenon than a patient. His lungs were burned, his blood poisoned, but he smiled anyway. "How are the miners?" he rasped. "Safe," the lead physician said. "Because of you." "Good," Ward whispered before falling asleep again. In that moment, something unmeasurable shifted in the Varine heart. They had mocked the Deathworlders for their emotion, but now they saw power in it. Weeks passed. The humans repaired their ship, and the Varine began sending envoys of their own. They studied human laughter, tears, and stories. They couldn't understand it fully, but they couldn't ignore it either. And then came the famine. A neighboring Varine world, Kareth, suffered a planetary crop collapse due to a parasite mutation. Their food reserves were minimal, and the Confederacy calculated that assistance would destabilize the economy. They chose silence, but the humans heard and acted. Without request, without treaty, a convoy of Terran freighters jumped into Kareth orbit, unloading food, medicine, and engineers. The Vahrin government protested. "You interfere in internal affairs," they said coldly. "We interfere in suffering," Ward replied. "There's a difference." At first the Vahrin resisted the help. They refused to eat the alien-grown food, refused to thank the humans who built water purifiers in the wastelands. But hunger has a way of humbling even the proud. Soon they accepted the aid. And when the first Vahrin child survived a fever because of human antibiotics, the protest quieted. The Confederacy's broadcasts, which once mocked humans as reckless primitives, began to change their tone. Commentators debated whether emotion had merit after all. "Perhaps," one said cautiously, "their chaos has function." Months turned into years. The relationship deepened. Humans built embassies, hospitals, and schools on Vahrin worlds. They didn't preach. They didn't conquer. They simply helped. And that, more than any display of power, unsettled the galaxy. Other races had always risen through dominance, trade, or manipulation. Humanity rose through compassion. They gave more than they received, trusted where others schemed, forgave where others retaliated. And slowly their mockers began to emulate them. But not all approved. A faction within the Confederacy, led by the high strategist Karel, saw humanity's influence as contamination. "They infect us with sentiment," he warned. "We must not let their weakness undo millennia of order." He proposed expelling all human envoys and dismantling their colonies. The council was divided. Some agreed, but others remembered the miners who had been saved, the children who had lived. When the vote came, it was nearly even. Only the intervention of one voice changed everything. The youngest counselor, a scientist named Zir. She had been one of the miners Ward saved on that first mission. "If kindness is infection," she said quietly, "then I am glad to be diseased." Still, Karel was not finished. As humanity's presence grew, so did resentment among the old guard. They began plotting in silence, seeking a way to prove that emotion led only to ruin. Ward sensed the tension but refused to withdraw. "We've come too far to stop being ourselves," he told his crew. "If they think kindness is weakness, then we'll show them just how strong compassion can be." He had no idea how soon he'd have to prove it. A disaster was coming, one that would test not humanity's strength, but its heart. The storm began not in the skies, but in whispers. Dark murmurs that moved through the corridors of the Vahrin Confederacy like a spreading crack through glass. High strategist Karel had not accepted defeat. He could not understand the humans, nor the way their presence eroded the precision of Vahrin order. To him, they were chaos incarnate, irrational, unpredictable, dangerous. And so in the cold depths of the Confederacy's military archives, he began crafting a plan to expose what he called the myth of human virtue. His reasoning was simple: show the galaxy that when pressed to the edge, even the Deathworlders would abandon kindness for survival. Karel's first step was subtle. He leaked falsified intelligence claiming that pirates, unaffiliated scavengers, were targeting Vahrin colonies aided by humans. In truth, these pirates were his own covert ships, painted in scavenger colors and ordered to attack supply convoys. The first assault struck the Kareth relief fleet, where human engineers were still working to stabilize the ecosystem. 3 freighters were destroyed, dozens killed. The human aid network reeled in shock. When Ward received the news aboard the Endeavour II, his face hardened, but his voice remained calm. "We don't retaliate," he told his crew. "We secure survivors, we help, and we prove we're better than the ones who attacked." His officers nodded, though grief and anger simmered beneath their discipline. Ward led a recovery team to the wreckage field. Among the drifting debris, they found scorched hull fragments bearing false pirate insignias. But to human eyes, trained to see through deception, it didn't fit. The weapon signatures were military grade, not scavenger. Ward said nothing publicly, but his mind was set. He knew someone wanted war. He refused to give it to them. Carell watched from the shadows as humanity continued their mission undeterred. His frustration grew. "They bleed and smile," he snarled during a private meeting with his aides. "They suffer and forgive. No creature should function like this." His lieutenant, a younger strategist named Rail, hesitated. Perhaps their strength lies in that forgiveness. Carell's crystalline edges flared with cold light. "Then we shall burn that strength away." The next blow came swiftly. A human medical station orbiting Vahrin Prime suffered a catastrophic explosion. Hundreds of Vahrin civilians were killed along with every human aboard. The Confederacy broadcast blamed human negligence, claiming their volatile fuel systems had failed. The public's trust cracked. Protests erupted across several systems. "They bring death with their mercy," the banners read. Ward, standing before the press, gave only one statement. "If we made a mistake, we'll answer for it. But we won't stop helping." His voice was tired but unwavering. The Vahrin media called it arrogance, yet even among them quiet voices began to ask, why would a people so devoted to saving lives be careless with their own? Weeks turned into months. Investigations began, but Carell controlled the flow of information. He ensured every report pointed back to human incompetence. Then one evening, Zir, the young counselor who owed her life to Ward, found discrepancies in the data logs. Explosive residue inconsistent with human materials. A hidden transmission buried beneath the energy signature. Someone had planted the bomb. She brought her findings directly to Ward. "They're trying to destroy you," she said, her crystalline face flickering with fear. "They want to prove you're monsters." Ward looked at her quietly for a long moment, then smiled. "Then we'll show them the truth. Not with words, with actions." The next day, the humans did something no one expected. Instead of retreating or demanding justice, they opened their medical ships to all, free of condition. They treated Vahrin wounded from riots, offered shelter to those displaced, and never once asked for thanks. They rebuilt what the explosion had destroyed, even though it had nearly destroyed them. The Confederacy couldn't compute such defiance through compassion. It wasn't strategy. It was something beyond logic. Slowly, Carell's narrative began to crack. The public saw not carelessness, but endurance. But the strategist was not done. His final gambit was a cruelty only an ancient mind could devise. He selected a remote colony, Karath Minor, home to both human settlers and Vahrin citizens, and arranged for a biological weapon to be released into the atmosphere. His agents ensured the pathogen was untraceable, mutating rapidly to mimic natural diseases. Then, Carell sent a message to both governments. "Contain the infection. Quarantine the world. No one enters. No one leaves." He expected humanity to flee, to save their own and abandon the infected. He expected logic to finally win. Ward received the transmission aboard the Endeavour II. The disease spread fast, overwhelming immune systems, turning lungs to fluid in days. Reports from the ground were horrific. Families dying in sealed shelters, Vahrin bodies crystallizing into brittle husks. Ward gathered his officers. "If we don't act, everyone down there dies," his medic said. "But going in means—" "We go in," Ward said before the sentence could finish. "Prepare the dropships." His crew didn't argue. They knew the risks. They went anyway. The landing was hell. The air shimmered with spores. Biohazard alarms screamed constantly. The human teams worked without rest, building isolation shelters, distributing medicine, and comforting the dying. The virus didn't care who it killed, human or Vahrin, and neither did the humans when they fought it. Ward himself was among the first on the ground, setting up triage stations with bare, gloved hands. The Vahrin scientists assisting him trembled. "You'll die," one warned. "We already accepted that," he said simply. "Now help me lift her." For 2 weeks, the Endeavour II transmitted reports to orbit. Hundreds saved. Thousands treated. Yet the pathogen mutated faster than their medicine could counter. One by one, the human medics began to fall ill. Still, they refused to leave. Ward grew paler each day, coughing blood through his respirator. "We've almost got the anti-serum," his doctor pleaded. "You need to rest." "After," he whispered. "After we save them." From his secure chamber, Karel watched the footage broadcasted across the network. Humans wading through infected streets, carrying crystalline bodies in their arms, speaking softly to calm the dying. No weapons, no commands, no demands, just kindness. His plan to expose them had backfired spectacularly. The galaxy was watching now, not with mockery but with disbelief and awe. Across hundreds of worlds, beings who had laughed at Deathworlders now wept as they saw them cradle their enemies' children. "They are dying," one Varin newscaster said through static, "and yet they smile." On the 14th day, the cure was found. Jur, coordinating from orbit, transmitted the formula down to the surface. The humans administered it tirelessly, even as their own vitals dropped. The infection finally broke. Karath Minor was saved, but at a terrible cost. More than half the human volunteers perished, including Ward himself. His last message, recorded in the final hours, spread farther than any ship could travel. "If kindness is weakness, then I'm glad we're weak. Because in weakness, we found something stronger than fear." The galaxy went silent. Even Karel, standing before the glowing images of the dead, could not speak. The logic he had lived by crumbled under the unbearable truth that no calculation could measure compassion. The humans he had mocked had given their lives not for victory, but for others' survival. In their sacrifice, they had changed the meaning of strength itself. When the quarantine lifted, Zur led the recovery ships to the surface. They found Ward's body beside a Varin child, both wrapped in the same emergency blanket. The girl had survived. She would later tell the world, "He held my hand so I wouldn't be scared." And for the first time in its long, emotionless history, the Confederacy held a day of mourning, not for their own, but for the Deathworlders they had once mocked. But grief is only the beginning of transformation. What came after would reshape every corner of the stars. The memorial stood beneath the twin suns of Varin Prime, its shadow long and sharp across the marble plaza. It was unlike any monument the Confederacy had ever built. Organic, irregular, imperfect. In the center was a human hand cast in bronze, fingers outstretched, holding a fragment of crystalline glass. At its base were words carved in both languages. "He held my hand so I wouldn't be scared." The girl who had spoken those words, now older and strong, stood before it in silence. Her name was Eris, and though she had never returned to Karath Minor since that day, her life had become something more than her own. She was known across the Confederacy as the child of the Deathworlder. The mourning had lasted for cycles. Entire planets observed silence. The Varin, a people who once calculated emotion as waste, learned grief for the first time. And from grief came awakening. The Council of Thought convened to reconsider their doctrine. "For millennia," Zir spoke, addressing the chamber, "we believed survival was logic, that compassion diluted clarity. Yet the Deathworlders, those we mocked, survived not because they were logical, but because they refused to stop caring. We owe them more than words. We owe them change." The chamber trembled with resonance, a sign of unease. The old guard remained silent, their crystalline minds unable to accept the shift. But the younger generations, those who had seen the transmissions, those who had felt their hearts fracture, nodded. Within a year, the Confederacy began reforming. Hospitals were established on every world, modeled after human facilities. Aid ships replaced patrol fleets. Laws were amended to include moral consideration as a factor in decision-making, a concept once dismissed as heresy. For the first time in their history, the Vahrin allowed emotion into governance. Yet progress rarely travels without resistance. Karel, disgraced but not destroyed, had vanished into exile. His followers, those who still clung to the purity of logic, formed enclaves in the outer systems, muttering of betrayal. "The humans have infected our soul," they whispered. "They must be purged before the Confederacy falls." Meanwhile, humanity continued to change the galaxy in quieter ways. The Endeavor II's surviving crew returned to Earth carrying stories that would become legend. Statues of Ward were raised across Terran colonies, but the humans refused to glorify him as a warrior. Instead, They honored him as a healer. Children in classrooms learned of his final transmission. "If kindness is weakness, then I'm glad we're weak." And in those words, humanity found new strength. When the United Terran Fleet returned to Varin space years later, they came not as conquerors, but as friends. The first joint human-Varin settlement was founded on neutral ground, a small green world named after him, Wardea. On Wardea, humans and Vahrin worked side by side. The two species learned from each other's extremes. The humans taught empathy, creativity, and chaos. The Vahrin taught structure, balance, and calm. Together, they began building what would later be known as the Concord of Empathy, a coalition built not on power, but on mutual understanding. To the outside empires it was madness. The Grail dominions laughed openly. "They build empires of feeling," their rulers sneered. "How quaint! Let us see how long their love lasts when the void burns." Others watched with caution. Compassion was unpredictable, and unpredictability frightened those who thrived on control. In those early years, Zur became one of the most influential voices in both governments. She visited Earth herself, her crystalline body gleaming under Terran sunlight. The humans welcomed her as family. "He would have liked you here," one child told her, placing a flower in her hand. Zur smiled, though her eyes shimmered faintly. "He already is here," she whispered. Her bond with humanity deepened, and her understanding of them became legend among her people. She wrote what became the founding text of the Concord, the Doctrine of the Gentle Hand. In it, she wrote, "The weak are not those who feel. The weak are those who fear to feel." It spread faster than any law or treaty, changing hearts before it changed systems. Yet peace never lasts unchallenged. In the dark stretches beyond the Concord's borders, Karel's exiles had gathered strength. They had allied themselves with mercenary fleets, trading the old science of the Confederacy for weapons. Their ideology twisted Ward's sacrifice into something grotesque. "The humans infected us with guilt," Karel declared to his followers in one of his broadcasts. "They taught us to weep when we should strike, to hesitate when we should act. They call compassion strength, but it is decay. We will purify what remains." His forces began attacking outlying colonies, particularly those where human and Varin lived together. Wardea was spared for now, but everyone knew it wouldn't last. When the first refugee ship limped into orbit over Wardea, its hull scorched, its passengers terrified, Zur stood on the landing pad to greet them. Among the wounded were humans and Vahrin alike, families who had fled Karel's cleansing raids. "They burned our homes," one human whispered. "They said we betrayed logic." Zur clenched her crystal fists. "Then we'll show them the price of cruelty," she said softly. Yet she remembered Ward's words and took a breath. "But not with vengeance. We'll answer as he would have." She called for the Concord's council, a body of mixed species, still young, still learning. They debated for hours. Some demanded retaliation. Others urged restraint. In the end, Zur proposed something unexpected. A rescue mission. "Karel's followers have taken captives," she said. "We won't destroy them. We'll bring them home." It was madness by military standards. To enter hostile territory unarmed was suicide. But humanity volunteered first. "If there's even one life left to save," said Captain Liana Torres, commander of the new Endeavour 3, "we'll go." The mission was swift and silent. The Endeavour 3 slipped past the exiles' patrols under stealth fields. The colony they reached was a nightmare. Blackened cities, empty halls, bodies left where they fell. But in the heart of the ruin, they found survivors locked in containment cells. Humans, Varin, even a few other species who had joined the Concord. When Torres and her team broke through the locks, the prisoners recoiled in fear. "You shouldn't have come," one of them sobbed. "They'll kill you." Torres only smiled. "Not if we leave first." As they evacuated, Karel's ships arrived. The sky lit with plasma fire. The Endeavour 3 could not outrun them. Torres made the same choice Ward had once made. She ordered her crew to take off while she stayed behind to manually overload the energy cores to buy them time. "You'll die," her engineer protested. Then I'll die helping, she said with a faint grin. The blast lit the clouds, blinding sensors across the system. The refugees escaped. Carell, watching from orbit, saw the fire and hissed in fury. They never learn, he snarled. They burn themselves for others. But his words carried no power anymore. The transmission of Torres's final act spread through the networks again, echoing across light years. It was the same story, repeated by different hearts. Humanity's compassion was not a singular miracle. It was a contagion that even death couldn't stop. Each sacrifice birthed another. Each act of kindness became another seed planted in the stars. When Zur received the transmission, she stood alone in the conquered chamber. Her hands trembled as she played the final message from Torres. We're not done, Zur. Ward wasn't the end of it. Every one of us carries a piece of what he started. Don't let them make you forget that. Then static. Silence. Zur closed her eyes. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she looked toward the council. They mock us still, she said quietly. But let them. We'll keep showing them what mockery cannot erase. Across the conquered worlds, candles burned. Not just for Torres, not just for Ward, but for all who had chosen to believe that kindness could stand against cruelty. Even the galaxies that once sneered began to wonder. The Grail dominions, who had mocked emotion, found their soldiers questioning orders to fire on humanitarian fleets. The old hierarchies trembled. Something unseen but unstoppable was spreading. A quiet revolution of empathy. Carell's war would continue, but its purpose was already lost. The galaxy had seen too much, learned too much. Even among his own ranks, some began to hesitate. They remembered the humans who had saved their children, the food convoys that arrived unarmed, the laughter that had once filled their markets. Logic could not erase memory, and compassion, once born, could not die. The war for hearts had begun, and humanity, the Deathworlders once mocked for their emotion, had already won the first battle without ever firing a shot. The night over Wardea was filled with lights, ships, drones, and the auroras that rippled through the upper atmosphere like painted fire. In the central dome, Zur stood beside the holographic table, her form faintly luminous, crystalline edges refracting the glow. Around her were representatives of every allied world. The situation was grim. Carell's forces had begun a campaign of terror along the outer ring of Concord space, burning colonies, seizing stations, and leaving coded transmissions that mocked their false kindness. Reports of atrocities poured in. Yet, despite the horror, humanity's reaction was not vengeance. It was rescue. The fleets mobilized not to destroy, but to protect and recover. They called their operation the Gentle Shield. It was an absurd name for war, but one that made every soldier remember why they fought. Zur looked across the table at the human admiral, Marcus Hale, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much. He had served with Ward years ago, and his presence carried that quiet gravity the others had learned to respect. "They're not fighting for victory," he said. "They're fighting to make us afraid of compassion." His voice was low, steady. "But they've forgotten something. Fear only works when hearts are empty. And we've filled ours with too many names." Zur nodded. "You speak as he did," she murmured. Hale smiled faintly. "He taught us all." The first major strike came at dawn. Carell's fleet descended on the planet Tovara, where thousands of refugees had gathered. The Concord forces scrambled to intercept, but they were outnumbered. Hale ordered the evacuation ships launched even before his fleet arrived, knowing many wouldn't make it out. He personally led the forward line in the battleship Resolute. As plasma storms erupted around them, the void turned to fire. The Resolute's hull groaned, alarms blaring. "Sir, they're targeting the lifeboats," the helmsman shouted. Hale's jaw tightened. "Then we give them something bigger to shoot at. Bring us between the fleet and the evac lines." The crew hesitated only a moment before obeying. The massive ship turned, intercepting the enemy barrage. The Resolute shook violently, plating ripping away like paper, but the lifeboat slipped past, engines flaring toward the atmosphere. Zur arrived soon after, leading the Varan defense wing. Her ships, sleeker and faster, weaved around the heavier human craft covering their flanks. "Marcus," she said through the comm, "your ship cannot hold that position." His voice came back calm. "Doesn't need to. Just long enough." The silence between their words was filled with the thunder of war. Together they bought enough time for 10,000 refugees to escape before the Resolute was torn apart. Hale's final transmission echoed through every channel. "We hold the line not with fire, but with faith." When the debris cooled, the Varan ships retrieved his data core. Jur placed it in the Concord Hall beside Ward's bronze hand. The war stretched into months. Karel's movement spread like infection, preaching the purity of logic, the cleansing of weakness. Entire systems fell under his control, yet he found himself fighting ghosts. The more he struck, the more stories emerged of human mercy. Every atrocity spawned another act of grace. A human medic who crossed battle lines to save a wounded enemy soldier. A Varan engineer who dismantled her own defense grid to protect civilians. A child who stood before Karel's troops holding a piece of Ward's likeness, refusing to move until they lowered their weapons. For every act of cruelty, kindness answered, unbroken and maddening in its persistence. Inside Karel's flagship, the Pillar of Reason, cracks began to form. Not in the hull, but in faith. His second-in-command, a Varan named Selth, had begun questioning orders. "We were meant to save our people," she said quietly as they watched footage of burning cities. "But all I see are corpses. Are we not becoming what they said we were?" Karel's crystalline face hardened. "Emotion clouds you, Selth. They infected you as they infected the others." "Maybe," she said, "but if infection feels like guilt, then maybe guilt is what we need." Karel's eyes flared, and in a flash of motion, he struck her down with a sonic blast. Yet even as she fell, she whispered, "He saved us, Karel. You killed him, and now you kill yourself." On Wardea, Zir listened to the intercepted transmission of that execution in silence. Around her the council waited. "He's unraveling," she said finally. "He's destroying his own." A human ambassador leaned forward. "Then now's the time to end it." But Zir shook her head. "We don't end things with fire. We end them with light." Her plan was audacious, a transmission broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, carrying images of every act of kindness the conquered had performed. It would show humanity not as destroyers or martyrs, but as healers. "We won't answer Karel's hate," she said. "We'll drown it in proof that he's wrong." They called it Project Dawn. Human archivists worked around the clock, compiling footage from colonies, hospitals, rescue missions, and even soldiers' helmets. Varan engineers constructed a transmitter the size of a moon, built above Wardea's orbit. When it finally activated, light cascaded across the stars, stories and faces woven into one endless stream. Karel's fleets received it mid-battle. At first they thought it was a weapon. Then they saw the images. A Terran nurse holding an alien child. A Varan artisan rebuilding a burned human settlement. A Graal deserter being welcomed into a human home. There was no sound at first, only faces. Then slowly a voice. Ward's, restored from old recordings. "We are not your enemies. We are what you could become." Across Karel's armada, confusion spread. Commanders hesitated. Soldiers lowered weapons. For some it was too much. They shut down their screens, screamed, fired blindly. But for others something broke. The cold certainty of logic. The armor of fear. They began transmitting surrender codes, one by one. Karel raged. "Turn it off!" He screamed, shattering consoles with his own hands. "Do not look at it." But they looked. The virus of compassion spread faster than his commands. One by one, his ships fell silent, engines powering down. Then came the final confrontation. The Pillar of Reason was cornered above the shattered moon of Varex. Zir herself led the fleet. "Karel," she said on open channel, "it's over. Your forces have surrendered. End this." His laughter was brittle. "End this? You think this ends with me? You've infected everything. The galaxy will rot in sentiment until nothing strong remains." Zir closed her eyes. Then let it rot into something that can finally feel. He sneered, and for a moment it seemed he might surrender. Instead, he activated the ship's self-destruct core. "If the galaxy wants light," he said, "then I'll show it the fire beneath it." The pillar began to collapse in on itself, energy spiraling out like a dying star. Jir shouted for withdrawal, but before her fleet could move, a single human transport, a medical ship named Serenity's Call, broke formation and flew straight toward the imploding flagship. Its captain, a young man named Noah Reeve, broadcast his voice to everyone. "You don't win by killing monsters. You win by refusing to become one." The Serenity collided with the pillar's reactor, detonating in a burst of light brighter than any sun. The explosion tore through Karel's fleet but somehow spared the Concorde ships, as if the universe itself had chosen where to draw the line. When the light faded, the battlefield was silent. No wreckage, no remains, just the faint shimmer of vaporized metal and the echo of one man's words. In the aftermath, Zur wept openly for the first time in her species' recorded history, not out of sorrow but awe. Humanity's capacity for sacrifice seemed endless, each death birthing more life. When the Concorde convened again, the vote was unanimous. Kindness is not weakness. It is strength refined by suffering. The words were engraved into the Concorde Charter. Years passed. The war became legend. Wardea grew into a living symbol of unity, a world where the children of 100 species played under twin suns. The Vahrin no longer feared emotion. They studied it, nurtured it. Human art filled their cities, paintings, songs, stories, all teaching that empathy could outlast empires. Even distant empires began to change. The Grell dominions abolished slave labor, citing the Wardea principle. The Zith collective, once isolationist, opened their gates to refugees. Bit by bit, the ripples spread. Jur aged slowly, her crystalline form dimming over centuries. But she never left Wardea. She spent her days walking the memorial gardens, where names of both human and Vahrin heroes were carved side by side. Children would find her there and ask, "Is it true, Elder Zir, that humans once scared the galaxy?" And she would smile faintly. Yes, they were feared not for what they could destroy, but for what they could endure. The galaxy mocked them, but it was kindness that conquered us all. Far beyond Wardea's skies, debris from the Serenity's Call still orbited the ruins of Varex, glimmering like a halo. Pilgrims came to see it, to feel the silence where war had ended. In that silence, they didn't hear explosions or commands. They heard laughter, the echo of Ward's final words, and the memory of every human who had ever chosen mercy over hate. Even those who had once mocked them now spoke their name with reverence. Deathworlders, beings who came from a planet that tried to kill them every day, had shown the galaxy what it meant to truly live. And in the dark between stars, where even light struggled to travel, that kindness burned on, refusing to die. Centuries passed, and the story of the Deathworlders became the foundation upon which the Concord of Empathy was built. What began as an alliance born from blood and mercy evolved into a civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds and thousands of cultures. The scars of the war with Karel had long since faded, but its lessons remained carved into every heart and every monument. Humanity, though small in number compared to the vast species of the galaxy, had become the quiet soul of the stars, a people not defined by their weapons or their wars, but by the warmth they carried through the void. Wardea, once a fragile experiment, now stood as the capital of unity. Cities of glass and green spiraled across its continents, where Varin architecture blended seamlessly with Terran artistry. Rivers glowed softly with bioluminescent flora, and the night skies shimmered with the drifting lights of orbiting stations. Every building bore some reminder of those who had come before. A fragment of Ward's bronze hand, a shard of Zir's crystal heart, or a line from one of the old transmissions engraved into the stone. If kindness is weakness, may the stars never be strong. Elder Zur had long since passed, her crystalline form laid to rest in the central garden beside the statue of Ward and Hale. The humans had mourned her as one of their own. To the Vahrin, she was no longer merely one of their kind. She had become something transcendent, a symbol of transformation. The Concord continued to expand under her teachings, guided by those she had mentored. The children of Wardia's first generation, who had never known a galaxy ruled by fear. They called themselves the Keepers of Dawn, and their sole purpose was to preserve the spirit of empathy that humanity had given the stars. But even light attracts shadows, and peace, no matter how enduring, breeds complacency. On the fringes of Concord space, a new voice had begun to whisper. It came not from the broken remnants of Karel's followers, but from those who had never known war, who looked upon the monuments of sacrifice and asked, was it truly necessary? They called themselves the Pragmatists, a collective of younger minds who believed the galaxy had grown too gentle, too hesitant. The Deathworlders taught us compassion, they said in their councils, but they also shackled us with guilt. We could have advanced faster, conquered more, reached further, if we weren't always pausing to feel. Their words spread quietly, carried by logic and fear disguised as reason. The old generation tried to dismiss them as harmless philosophers, but soon their influence grew. They infiltrated institutions, redirected funds from humanitarian efforts to military research, and began rewriting history to paint humanity's mercy as dangerous naivety. Empathy, they argued, was useful when the galaxy bled, but in an age of peace it makes us vulnerable. On Wardea, the council convened to address the growing dissent. The new chairwoman, Aaliyah Ward, descendant of the man who had once saved the stars, stood before them. She was young, fierce, and calm, her eyes the color of storm clouds. "They misunderstand," she said. "Empathy isn't weakness. It's the only thing that kept us from becoming the monsters we feared." But some of her advisors looked uneasy. "Perhaps," said one Vahrin minister, "we've leaned too much on human ideals. The new generation doesn't remember what cruelty cost us. They see only how much slower peace feels." Aliyah's voice softened. "Then we must remind them, not with war but with truth." Her solution was as audacious as Zur's had once been. Deep within the archives of Wardea lay the original records of humanity's first contact with the galaxy. Raw footage, unedited transmissions, the screams and silence of what it meant to be Deathworlders in a hostile universe. Aaliyah ordered them restored and projected to every world of the Concord. For 7 days and nights the stars themselves became screens. Billions watched as they saw the truth of humanity's beginnings. The storms of Earth, the endless struggle to survive, the wars fought and ended, the cities rebuilt from ashes. They saw the faces of the first Terrans who ventured into space, their eyes weary but unbroken. They saw Ward's final stand, Hale's sacrifice, Torres's defiance, and the shining collision of the Serenity's call. They saw kindness as it truly was, raw, costly, and fierce. When the broadcast ended, silence spread across the galaxy. The pragmatists could not speak for a day. On worlds light years apart, children wept, soldiers stood in salute, and elders bowed their heads. The Concord's flag, an open hand cupping a single star, was raised again on every colony. Aliyah's message followed. "We were born on a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived not because we were stronger, but because we refused to stop caring. If you call that weakness, then I will carry it proudly. Because it means we never stopped being human." Her words reignited something ancient, something that had been sleeping within the hearts of every race that had once been touched by humanity. The pragmatists faded, their arguments crushed not by force, but by memory. Decades turned into centuries once more, and the Concord thrived. Humanity's numbers dwindled as they spread thin across the stars, their lifespans long but their birth rates low. Yet they were never forgotten. To the younger races, humans were now myths, wanderers who appeared when compassion was needed, and vanished once balance returned. Some claimed to have seen them on distant worlds, tending to wounded travelers or rebuilding homes after asteroid strikes. Whether those sightings were truth or legend, no one could say. What mattered was the belief that somewhere among the stars, the children of Earth still watched. On the 1000th anniversary of the Concord's founding, the galaxy gathered on Wardea. The celebration lasted 10 days. Representatives from hundreds of species came to honor the legacy of unity. In the central plaza, under the twin suns, a new monument was unveiled. A living tree, its roots woven from Vahrin crystal, and its leaves grown from Terran genetic design. It glowed softly, whispering with bioluminescent light. At its base was a plaque bearing the words, "In kindness, we became infinite." As the ceremony began, Aaliyah Ward, now old, her hair silver, addressed the crowd. "The galaxy mocked us once," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "They called us fragile, emotional, doomed to break. But look around you. What they mocked built 1,000 worlds. What they feared has outlived them all." Her speech was broadcast across every inhabited system. In the outer colonies, miners paused their work to listen. On ocean planets, aquatic races hummed in resonance to her words. Even among the distant remnants of old empires, rulers bowed their heads. In that moment, the galaxy felt whole. When the sun set that evening, their light was reflected from the tree, sending waves of gold through the city. Children laughed, elders sang, and for a fleeting heartbeat, the universe itself seemed at peace. Yet even in peace, humanity remained restless. Their nature was to wander, to seek, to challenge the horizon. A new generation of explorers prepared to venture beyond the mapped stars, into regions where no Concord beacon reached. Aaliyah's granddaughter, Mara Ward, was among them. She stood before the tree before her departure, placing her hand against its roots. "We'll carry you with us," she whispered. The air around her shimmered faintly, and some said they saw the outline of a man in old Terran armor smiling beside her, just for a moment. Whether spirit or memory, it didn't matter. The legend continued. When Mara's fleet departed, the galaxy watched in silence. Their destination lay beyond the Perseid expanse, where no signals had ever returned. For centuries afterward, their transmissions were faint but steady. Reports of strange worlds, new life, new alliances. Then one day they stopped. No distress call, no warning, only silence. Many feared the worst, but Aaliyah, now near her final days, smiled when she heard. "They found something," she said, "something worth staying for." Her last words before she passed were simple. "If they mock us again, let them. We've shown them enough." 1,000 more years later, the Concorde still stood, though humanity had become more legend than people. Yet on a small moon orbiting an unnamed star, archaeologists uncovered something ancient, a recording buried in layers of dust and time. When played, it projected the image of a man with tired eyes and a gentle smile. His words were soft but carried through the hall. "To whoever finds this, we were the Deathworlders. We came from a place that broke us every day, and still, we learned to love. If you ever doubt the worth of kindness, remember us. We were mocked, we were feared, but it was kindness that saved the stars." The message ended, leaving only the sound of wind through alien ruins. The archaeologists wept. They copied the recording, and within years it spread again across the galaxy, just as it had millennia before. And so the circle closed. The story of humanity was not one of conquest or empire, but of echo. They had not sought to rule the stars. They had taught them how to feel. In every hand that reached to help, in every tear shed for a stranger, in every act of mercy against reason, humanity lived on. The galaxy no longer mocked the Deathworlders. They spoke of them with reverence, as the bringers of dawn. And though their world was far behind, their light traveled still, carried in the hearts of those who once feared them. Somewhere beyond the last visible star, perhaps humanity still walked among the unknown, whispering the same words that had changed creation itself. Be kind, even when the universe tells you not to.